everyone. Alright, so in today's video I'm going to be giving you a complete breakdown of how I created the scene. This is not a step-by-step tutorial. We won't be creating this from start to finish. Instead, I'm taking you behind the scenes and giving you some insight into how this entire scene was created. So I'll be talking about the construction of the arcade machine, the humans, the animated aspects that you see, like the animated video and the Ken and Ryu fighting on top of the arcade machine. I'll be talking about some lighting, creating the turntable, creating materials. There's quite a lot in this video to consume, so if you're interested in seeing how I work with Blender and Eevee, then stick around, and without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so here's my entire project running in real time with Eevee in Blender 2.9. This was a super fun project to work on. There's quite a lot going on over here. We've got the animated screen, we've got Ken and Ryu that's fighting at the top of the arcade machine as well. But I decided to use Eevee instead of Cycles because I did want to work with a real-time render engine. I wanted to see my end results immediately, and I'm trying my best to see what's possible with Eevee. So I wanted to do a full turntable presentation with all of these animated elements, which is something you don't really get to see that often. Like, a lot of turntables just have static OBJs, but over here I wanted to include some video elements as well, just to add another dimension to the turntable. So I opted to use Eevee because in terms of speed, like I said, it's a real-time render engine and it really helps me a lot when it comes to visualizing these scenes. So before I even got started with any modeling within Blender, I did some research. Obviously, I think this is super important. You should always gather reference images whenever you start in a project. So I went ahead and found images of, the inside of arcade stores during the 90s, just to get a general idea of what the lighting looks like as well, because I was trying to replicate the lighting within a 3D workspace. So I tried my best to gather images of arcade machines, so real images of these arcade machines within the real world, just to get a general idea of what they look like. But the only limitation with real world images like this is that we can only see the machine from one specific angle. Well, there's obviously lots of images online. You can probably find it from multiple angles, but this is where the power of looking for a 3D version of whatever you're trying to recreate really comes in handy, because 3D artists usually upload their objects from multiple angles. So if you're maybe wondering what an arcade machine looks like from behind, you'll usually get to see that on a 3D version of whatever it is that you're trying to recreate. So I'll always gather real world examples to get some inspiration, and I'll also look at some 3D objects that we created. Okay, so let's talk about the construction of the arcade machine, and it's actually fairly simple to create. This is a very basic shape. There's a lot of blocky elements on here, and a lot of the corners have been rounded off. So if you understand basic 3D design principles, I'm sure a lot of you already know how to approach something like this. But the way I approach creating the basic shape for this arcade machine, I would actually bring in a side view. So I'd find a side view of an arcade machine like this, and just drag and drop that into my 3D workspace. Now I want to make sure whenever I'm dragging and dropping in an image, I want to make sure that I'm snapped to one of these views, an orthographic view like this, and drag and drop it into Blender. Then I would scale this up, and now I can start modeling within Blender. So the construction of the arcade machine started from the default cube. So whenever you launch in Blender, you usually have this cube. I decided to use it to create the arcade machine. So this is a good base for me because it's already blocky, and it's just a matter of adding additional edges on here and extruding and applying bevels. So I'll create the default cube, press tab, and then let's maybe select this top face. And an easier way to see my reference image as well as my geometry is to go into X-ray mode or wireframe mode, and now you see that while I'm editing this, I can start moving it around. Okay, and then it's just a matter of, maybe I want to add an edge loop over here and then another edge loop for the screen. And let's see, maybe I want to select this front face and extrude that out. Then maybe I want to select, let's see, this top piece and move that down. Now obviously you want to do that so that it matches a lot better. I'm just showing you extremely quickly because I'm not going to make this entire arcade machine. That would take way too much time. And that's not the point of this tutorial. I'm just trying to give you an overall breakdown of what's going on here. So that's the approach that I took for doing this. Okay, and if I go ahead and just hide the plane, as you can see, obviously if you maneuver those pieces around a lot more precisely, you'll get a better overall shape. But for certain edges that you see over here, I'd even select some of them like this. I know there'll be some on the back. Then I can right click and go to dissolve edges just to clean up that area. Okay, I'll bring this forward a little bit more. And now you can see I can select this entire face. It's nice and clean with this topology, and then I would just select some of these edges. All right, and this is how I was creating some of those rounded corners just by using this bevel. Right, and if I scroll on my mouse wheel, it adds more segments. Okay, just showing you a general idea of how that's done. And also for the side panels, I would select a side panel, right click, and I would split that off. So now this has been separated. You see if I move it, then if I press E to extrude this, all right, I'm adding an extrusion onto it. And if you press L, you can individually select it like that. Right, now I can go ahead, scale this up, and do whatever I want. So this is exactly how I approached the overall construction of creating the arcade machine. So I'll bring in that reference image and try and match it as close as possible. But this is how it was created, and then it's just basic design principles after this and doing subdivision modeling to create the arcade machine. Okay, so once the arcade machine was created, I actually wanted to texture the entire object directly in Blender. I didn't want to go over to Substance Paint or anything. I wanted to see what I could do in Blender, and you can actually do quite a lot. So this entire arcade machine is not unwrapped. I'll actually be showing you later how these decals and everything was applied on here, but setting up the basic materials is something I really wanted to focus on within Blender. Right, so with this arcade machine, if I zoom in, you'll see that the actual surface of these materials has this really nice breakup on it. Right, there's these smudges and even sometimes there's a little bit of scratches, and these are some tileable roughness maps that I actually created myself. I've built an entire pack of this stuff. You can see over here how I've used it on toys and on helmets to create scratches, and on the screens of phones and all of that, and it adds this next layer of realism just to create, you know, a surface that has been broken up, because no surface in reality is completely clean. So if you try and replicate that within the 3D realm as well, you'll be creating more accurate and more realistic looking materials. So these materials, if I go to the shading tree, right, the actual material itself is just a basic principled BSDF. You can see there's nothing else that's plugged into metallic or specular. The only map that's included on this principled BSDF is the roughness map that I've created. So I've just plugged it into the roughness over here, and I was using one of the scratches and smudges maps, and I used a color ramp over here as well just to control the way that it looks. Right, you can see if I start clamping this roughness value, it makes the surface look a lot more shiny, but we've still got this really nice breakup on the surface of this material. So it makes it look way more realistic. If I actually detach this roughness slider, you can see how this looks. It looks very CG. It's just a flat looking material, but by using a roughness map or a surface imperfection map, we get some very, very nice breakup in the roughness, and it adds so much more detail to these materials. And then I also use this brightness and contrast to also control the way that this roughness looks on the surface. So I've got a huge library of these roughness maps on my Gumroad page. If you're interested, I have linked that down in the description. There's a link to my Gumroad page if you want to go and check it out. It's called Surface Imperfection Maps, if you want to get your hands on a large library of these bad boys. But that's all I use. So basic principle BSDF, and then my own tileable surface imperfection maps just to add a breakup on the surface of these materials and to make it look more realistic. Okay, since we're still talking about materials, you can see over here this button actually has an emission material applied onto it, so it's actually glowing. So if you're wondering how to create an emission material with Blender, let me just quickly let's create Suzanne the monkey and just scale up a little bit. So to create an emission material, it's super easy. So I'm just going to go to my material editor, click on new, and then just go to the shading tree. So all you want to do over here is we've got our principled BSDF. Press Shift A and create a mix shader. Then press Shift A and create an emission. And plug the emission into the second shader slot. And then you can bump up this value. So let's maybe try a different color. But there we go. But you'll see that it's glowing. And the reason why this is glowing so much is because under my render properties, I've enabled bloom. So without that bloom, you're not going to get this glowing effect. But this is how you set up a basic emission material, and that's how I created that glowing button. Now let's talk about these decals. So this was a super fun method for actually texturing an object without having to unwrap it. So if I go into the solid viewport shading, you'll see that these are planes. So maybe some of you that have been using Blender already know what I've done over here. I'm using a feature in Blender called images as planes, and you need to activate this as an add-on in the preferences. So if you go to edit, preferences, and add-ons, and you type images, import, export images as planes, make sure that is selected, because this is the feature I'm using for importing images directly into Blender that have transparent backgrounds. So what I've done is I've gone on Google and I've sourced images of PNG images. So this is an image with a transparent background, and in Blender you can actually import this directly into the viewport. So you would press F3 to open up the search, and then you just type images, and this is what we want, images as planes. So I'm going to go to my desktop over here, and let me go and find Ken, and just click on import images as planes. Now let me see where this is. Okay, I have to scale this up, and you'll see automatically, because it's a PNG image with a transparent background, there we go, it's already being keyed out and it's ready to use wherever we want to use it. So now you can go ahead, select this, rotate it. If I hold on control, you can just select it and position it right wherever you want. This is a great way of creating decals. Okay, there's a simple way to position a PNG image directly in Blender. But a nice way of applying these decals onto the surface of geometry is to use a feature in Blender that's called Shrinkwrap. So I'm actually going to create a cube. Now it depends on how complex objects are. Sometimes this feature works really well against flat surfaces. If it's more organic surfaces, it can be a little bit wonky, but this is still a cool way to apply, a decal as directly onto the surface. So to do this, you want to select the decal, so the images as a plane. Go to the wrench icon, go to add modifier, and select shrink wrap. Now over here we need to select the target, so I want this to be shrink wrapped on the cube, so select the cube. Now if I start moving this forward, let me just see what's going on here. Okay, just try and select my, okay, there, I got it selected. Now I'm going to I'm pressing W and just moving it around. You'll see that it shrink wraps to the surface like this. But sometimes you do encounter some issues with how this works, but you can offset it as well. Right, if you feel like it's intersecting with the geometry too much, just offset it. But it's still going to be constrained to the surface. Okay, so that's one way of doing this. Maybe you might find it a little bit wonky, but if you wanted something to be really flat against the surface of geometry, using shrink wrap can come in handy. So give it a try and let me know what you think. See, I can rotate, scale that down, and move it wherever I want. Okay, and it's going to conform to the geometry, so it'll be completely flat against the surface. But in this case with the arcade machine, I use both methods of shrink wrap and just positioning a plane, because remember, this is a completely flat surface. Applying an image as a plane against here was very, very simple. You can see this is actually not shrink wrapped, it's just the plane positioned exactly where I wanted it to be, and that allowed me to add these decals. And now you can do some additional storytelling with these decals as well. Let's say that it's got some weathering on it and some tears. You can create a procedural weathering material on the actual decal itself. So when you import your images as planes, it creates a principal BSDF. You'll have the image attached to a base color. Now don't worry about these nodes over here. The most important nodes right now for creating procedural weathering are these nodes. So you would want to create a mix shader, and then you'd want to create a transparent BSDF that where the color is completely white, and then you'd want to create a color ramp. And you can see I've clamped these values really close, and if I adjust these values right now, you can see it really alters the effect of this procedural weathering. But the weathering is actually a result of this noise texture. Without the noise texture, we won't get this weathering effect. So this is all noise that's being applied onto this. And then this brightness and contrast is a nice way of controlling how much of the sticker is being displayed. So maybe someone came over here and they really started taking a whole lot of pieces of the sticker of this arcade machine. You can do that. So these are the main nodes that I mentioned. Okay, and I'm going to undo that, and then I added another layer of detail and complexity onto the sticker. You'll see when the light is shining on here, it almost looks like the surface is raised a little bit. So to do that, I created a bump map. Then I took the exact same diffuse image that was imported from images as planes, and I plugged that diffuse into the height. So now if I increase the strength slider, pay attention to the stick itself. It adds this additional detail on here. Right, it gives it some height, because usually it's completely flat like that. If you want some added dimension, you can use some bump in the normal and then use the exact same image to drive some of that height. And then over here I'm just using the roughness map, that surface imperfection on top of the sticker as well, to create some additional detail. But this is a nice way to do storytelling through texturing, because now it looks like the sticker's been on here for quite some time, and it's there's been some naughty kids in the arcade and they've started ripping off pieces, or it's just a really old arcade machine that's seen better days. Yeah, there we go. That's how you create procedural weathering. I actually learned how to do this from Ian Hubert, these nodes. So it's very, very simple setup. But I added some more complexity using bump. Okay, so let's talk about the animated screen. So you can see over here when I'm scrubbing forward, there's an actual video that's playing on the arcade screen. So this was super awesome to include. And the awesome feature about Blender is that you can import video files directly into Blender, and you'll be able to see them playing within the viewport in real time. So I just simply went on YouTube, looked for a video of Street Fighter 2. Right, this is a .mp4 file, and then in Blender I just press F3. And you want to use images as planes. So images as planes can also import video files. So now if I go to my folder over here, my arcade folder, and I just bring in that video again. Alright, it's over here, .mp4. So just import this into the scene. And now if I scale this up, oops, let me just move that over here, scale this up. There we go. I've imported a video into the scene. Now you'll see if I scrub on the timeline, that video is actually going to start playing. So another thing that's really important, especially if you have long animations, you can actually select the images as a plane. And if you go to shading and you click on this option over here called cyclic, it's actually going to repeat that animation forever until you decide to end your animation. So it's a nice way of creating a loop, just by enabling cyclic. And another way to get the screen to actually glow, so just to make it look like there's a screen that's actually turned on, if you create a mix shade over here and then you create an emission and then you plug this color into the emission, into the strength, sorry, not into the strength, into the color, and then you bump up the slider, the strength slider, you can see that these elements over here start glowing. And that's taking full effect of the bloom. So it's really awesome that you can import these video files directly into Blender, and you can see the video playing in real time in the viewport. So that's a fantastic feature. So what's cool about having this as a plane, because remember this is just a piece of geometry as well, it's just a simple plane. If I press tab, I can even start editing this plane, right? And the video is still going to play on here. So let's say I was creating a curved screen, for instance. I can just add edge loops and look, I can move this forward and it's going to adjust the animation. But if I click play, that video is still playing, even on this piece of geometry that's been edited. So that's pretty nuts that it does that and that you can see this in real time. So now I've created like a curved screen. And I would just have to select that and then maybe select these edges and apply some bevel on here. And now we have those revolutionary curved screens. So maybe if you were doing a circular building with like those huge LED screens, you could even curve the screen like this. So very, very cool stuff. Alright, so during the animation you'll notice on top of the arcade machine, right, we've got Ken and Ryu that are busy fighting. Right, and that's these sprites that are fighting on top of the arcade machine. Now since we've already talked about images as planes, yes, these animated Everything that you see animated over here, even these speech bubbles that say yes and wow, these are all image planes. But in order to get this into Blender, I actually experimented and I can't believe that it actually worked. It actually blew my mind at first, because now you can just import green screen footage directly into Blender and it plays in real time in the viewport. So like I said, this is green screen footage, and I basically started in Premiere Pro. So I'm going to be going to Premiere Pro and show you how I prepared the green screen files to bring them into Blender. So I just went on YouTube and looked for green screen videos of Ryu and Ken, and here's one right over here. So just drag and drop that into Premiere, drag that onto my timeline. Now I got this green screen. I'm also just going to unlink the audio over here because I don't need it. Now over here in the search, I just want to search for Ultra, and this is it. Drag and drop this onto the MP4, and here by the key color, click on this color picker and click on green, and it keys it out. Now you'll still notice with some videos, because they don't take up the entire screen, they'll still have a bit of a seam over there. So to fix that, you just want crop. So drag crop on the video, and now crop the left side until that, you can see there's a seam over there, just until that seam is no longer visible, because that seam will be visible in your 3D viewport. So now he's cropped out, right? We basically did some chroma keying, and now I can export this out of the program. So file, export media, and I have a preset already selected. So you want to use QuickTime, and I'm just going to activate my preset. So on the preset, you can see it's QuickTime, it's using GoPro, the quality is on 5, and render at maximum depth, and use maximum render quality, and then that's it, and click on export, and it's going to save out a video file that's been chroma keyed and the background is completely transparent. So in this case, anything with a green screen, you can chroma key it out and bring it into Blender. So once that QuickTime file is saved out, I just press F3, images as planes, and I already have a chroma keyed folder over here. I've like done a lot of stuff, Mario and cats and game over screens and all of that. But here's the movie file. So if you see a completely gray background like this, you know that the background has been chroma keyed out successfully. Okay, actually let's bring in Ken and scale up Ken. Now look at that. That's cool, right? You've got this chroma keyed video within a 3D workspace. So now it's 2D combined with 3D. And then if you go to shading, remember to loop it, just enable cyclic. And another thing to take note of under the material settings, because right now, oh there we go, your shadow mode over here, usually it's on opaque. Put that on alpha clip so that any shadows that are being cast from the chroma keyed video, it'll actually cast the silhouette of that character, because sometimes it's going to cast a hard shadow of the actual plane. But if you change it to alpha clip, it's actually going to cast whatever's been chroma keyed out. So now you can see there's a chroma keyed video playing in real time in Blender. So a really interesting way of using green screen footage inside of Blender. Also, one more tip, if for some reason you never cropped your video correctly in Premiere, you can still do some cropping in Blender. So if you select your chroma keyed video and you press tab, remember I can add edge loops. So let's say there was a seam, a seam right on the edge. Just add an edge loop over here, wherever that seam is visible. And then you can go to faces and select, make sure I'm on there. You can select that face and then just press delete and click on delete faces. So now I just chopped off that region wherever a seam could have been visible. So that's a great way for doing manual cropping directly in Blender to some footage. Okay, so let's talk about the human beings in the scene. So these human beings are 3D scanned, right? If I go in and I actually zoom in on these characters, these are real people that have been 3D scanned, and now we can use them within the 3D realm. So I was going for something that has realism. You can see, especially with the folds on the clothes and all of that. I could have made stuff like this in Marvelous Designer, but since this is static, I just felt that it would be easier to use some 3D scanned humans, and I already had some in my library that I wanted to use in a future project. So I managed to use this little kid in the arcade machine project. So having access to 3D scanned humans is just a great way of adding very realistic humans into your scenes. Okay, and if you're looking for some websites to actually get 3D scanned humans, you can get some from renderpeople.com. So they have some of the most unbelievably awesome 3D scan humans because their library is massive, and you can see they've even got characters in the A pose. So if you're using a website like Mixamo, you could even upload this character to Mixamo, and then it'll be automatically rigged and it'll bring this kid to life and get him moving around. You can also check out 3D Scan Store. So this website has some of the most high quality scans I've seen out of every other website, and they've even got packs over here. You'll see here with a whole bunch of 3D scan humans, or you can check out cgtrader.com and just type in scanned humans and you'll find some on here as well. Some are affordable, some are quite expensive. It depends on your budget, but 3D scan humans is a great way to populate your 3D scenes. Okay, so the final aspect to discuss with the scene is the lighting and this turntable and the backdrop that I set up for the final presentation. So whenever it comes to lighting, remember lighting is a way that you can also do storytelling. So in this case, I looked at reference images of what arcades look like inside with all of the neon lighting. I noticed there's a lot of blue lights and these pink neon lights that are shining in the scene. You can see without these additional point lights and area lights that I've created, the scene is quite dark. And this is maybe cool. Maybe you're creating an indoor scene with the lights turned off, and because there's an emission applied onto the screen, we're still getting the light being projected over here. So you can have a lot of fun when it comes to lighting. But in this case, I've taken a whole bunch of different lighting. You can see over here, I just named these turntable because there's different scenes that I'm doing. One where there's going to be an indoor scene, like an actual built-out scene, but this one, these lights are just for the turntable. And you can see I've positioned blue lights, pink lights in certain areas, right? And then this light over here was actually very important for presentation. So it's this light that I put against this backdrop that you see in the distance, and it makes a huge difference with the presentation, because if I turn this off, right, let me just hide this. I feel like, okay, this could work as a rendered out image, but I like to create that gradient, that soft gradient in the distance. You can see with this turned on, it creates this blue gradient. You can see it towards the edges, it gets darker, and it just looks really nice for presentation. And this is just a simple point light that's up really close to this backdrop, and this is just a plane, right? It's a plane that's got some roughness applied onto it. There's nothing special going on there. It's just a light that I placed close to the backdrop to create this nice gradient for the overall presentation. So play around with lighting. Lighting makes a huge difference when it comes to setting the mood in your scenes. This is a great way of doing storytelling as well. And I thought I would just mention and show you some of the lighting that's been set up here. Now let's discuss the turntable, because you can see there's a lot of elements in the scene, right? Especially with the arcade machine. There's bolts, there's the buttons, there's the actual arcade machine itself, there's human characters and animated video, but everything is rotating on this podium over here, or the floor that I created. So how do we actually create turntables? And to do this is really simple, especially if you have a lot of objects in your scene. You don't want to go ahead and try and rotate each object individually, right? You're going to make yourself go insane if you try and go that route. There's a very easy way to create turntables. So let me show you how that's done. I'll actually do that in a completely new scene. Okay, so if you want to create a turntable, let's just create a couple objects. Create a monkey. So create Susan. And then let's create a UV sphere. And I'll just duplicate that. So Shift D. Duplicate that. And now let's create a podium. So this is going to be the floor. This is the most important aspect of the turntable. Okay, so there's my podium. This is going to be the floor, and I'll just scale it down like this. So everything that's above the podium is going to be rotating with the podium as well. So there we go. I actually want this to be on, let's put one of these spheres on the podium. Okay, so we got Susan, we got spheres, and then we've got the podium. So how do we create the turntable instead of rotating everything individually, or selecting everything? You could do that, but sometimes when scenes get super complex with lots of different groups, trying to do this method might be a little bit tricky. So instead you can use a feature in Blender that's called parenting. Okay, so to do this parenting workflow, we're actually going to be creating a empty object. So you want to press Shift A and create an empty. But before we actually create this plane axis, you want to make sure you've got the podium selected. And in this case, you can see our gizmo is right in the center of this podium. But if for whatever reason it's not at the center of the podium, you just want to go to Object, set origin and then say origin to geometry, and that should snap right to the origin point of the podium itself. Right, you want to make sure, it's very important that the access point is right in the center, because you can see when I'm rotating this, it's rotating perfectly, and it will make sure everything else that's linked to it will rotate perfectly as well. So once the origin point is over there, let's press Shift A and go to empty, and now create a plane axis. So the plane axis is created right in the center, and this is good to go. So I'm going to put this just above. No, actually I don't need to. I'll just keep it there. So the order of how we select this really matters. We want to select the objects first that are going to rotate with our empty. So I want to select the podium, the sphere, the monkey, and this other sphere, and then the last object we select needs to be that empty. So I'm going to go in my layer stack over here, and I'll hold on Control and left click to select that empty. So now you'll notice with the color of the selected objects, everything over here has a dark orange outline on it, and as long as you see this dark orange outline, you'll know that the order selection is correct. But it's very easy to remember. Select all the objects first and then select the empty last. Then go to Object, Parent, and click on Object. Now you can see it parented everything to the empty and it groups it all together. So now if I select the empty and rotate this, there we go. Everything is linked to that empty. And this is exactly how you create a turntable. Very, very simple to do. And now if I was doing a full 360, I would snap to the Z axis. So I'm looking at this from the top. I would enable this auto keyframe. And now just for frame 0, if I hold on Control and just drag forward a little bit like that, and then while I'm still holding this down, just snap back to the starting point, it automatically creates that keyframe. Then maybe go to frame 100. And now rotate this all the way around 360. See at the top left hand corner, I can see over there it would show you that you're doing a 360. Alright, and then I want to turn that off. So there we go. There's your turntable. And now to get the turntable, because let me put my end on 100. If I click play, notice that this turntable, it's turning, but then it's got this gradual slowdown towards the end. If you want to fix that, just go into animation, and over here, I'm not entirely sure what this is called, but it's this icon. As long as you can see these keyframes, you just right click here and go to interpolation mode and put that on linear. So it creates a linear transition like this, so that it's constantly spinning in one motion. It doesn't slow down at all. It just continues spinning. So it loops perfectly by doing this. And this is how you create turntables. Very, very simple to do. And that parenting option really comes in handy. Alright, so that's going to be the end of this breakdown video. Hopefully now you can see just how powerful Blender and Eevee is. The fact that we got that real-time viewport, we get to see our results immediately. We can even bring in videos and chroma keyed videos into a real-time viewport. That still blows my mind, and I absolutely love this program so much for visualizing and just bringing ideas to life. So I really had an absolute blast working on this project, and I wanted to take you behind the scenes and give you some insight into how it was actually constructed. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Did you enjoy this video? Did you learn something from it? I really hope so. Anyway, I truly appreciate the support on this channel so much. You guys are super awesome, and stay tuned for some more videos and tutorials, and goodbye.